When someone asks if you're a god, you say yes. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. We've talked ghosts before, and these movies specifically have been discussed a bit in previous episodes, but it wasn't enough for us. So we thought we'd use our second summer of sci-fi to go more in depth with the first two Ghostbuster movies, or as I like to call them, Someone Save Dana from the Men of New York City. Okay, so we decided to talk Ghostbusters because in our past few episodes we've kind of noticed a theme in that we're discussing movies that have really great sequels. So we talked Alien and Aliens and Terminator and Terminator 2, and so we thought the next progression of that should be Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2, because not only are they iconic kind of summer blockbusters, but they're movies that we I think all three of us really enjoy, and they at least for me, they were a big part of my childhood. And so it was fun to go back and revisit them. Although I noticed some things this time around that really stuck out to me, like just how much of Dan Aykroyd's voice came through in the script for these movies, because it's not really a straight up horror film, and it's not really a straight up thriller. Like, it's kind of this nebulous thing. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, Lisa, I totally agree. I think you see a lot. I mean, even though Ghostbusters was written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, you do get a lot of Aykroyd's kind of humor and voice in the movie. And Ghostbusters was kind of Aykroyd's baby. I don't know, Matt, Lisa, do you guys want me to talk a little bit about the background of the movie and how it was kind of inspired and that sort of thing?
Yeah, go for
I'm
it.
so curious to hear about this.
Okay, well, people talk about how what Aykroyd really wanted was Ghostbusters to be a project for himself and John Belushi. And so the idea was that they were going to call themselves Ghost Mashers, and they would be traveling through time and space. I assume mashing ghosts. I don't know the particular details of it. And so the director had deemed the kind of original script just financially impractical. So they wouldn't be able to do these scenes. And of course, John Belushi passed away. And so Harold Ramis and Aykroyd kind of rewrote the script. But one of the things that I find interesting with my interest in the supernatural in literature, and also I think I might have missed the episode you guys did on real life ghost hunters, and I'm also fascinated by those shows and that sort of thing as well, is that Aykroyd, while it's his comic vision, he was also kind of inspired by his family's interest, fascination with the supernatural and spiritualism in particular. So there's this book that Dan Aykroyd's father, Peter Aykroyd, wrote, and it came out in 2009 called The History of Ghosts. And when I was doing some quote-unquote scholarly work on Ghostbusters, I read the book, and Aykroyd talks in the foreword, Dan Aykroyd does, about how when people ask him why he decided to write Ghostbusters, he tells them that it's partially because in the 1900s, his family was part of the spiritualism movement. They wished to make contact with the dead, and I believe it was his great-grandfather who created his own home circle, his own home spiritualist circle that met regularly under the leadership of a psychic named Walter Ashurst, who kind of became like the family's medium. And Aykroyd's father, Peter, had witnessed these sittings and kept the family's books, notes, and papers on these sittings and the things that were said and the things that happened. And Dan Aykroyd has said later that he and his brother read all these books avidly, and they love the American Society for Psychical Research and those reports. And he said that from that is kind of how Ghostbusters got made. And so all the stuff that we've talked about on the podcast before, about the Fox sisters, he mentions them, the idea of this kind of like Sherlock Holmes / scientist figure looking for proof of ghosts, the psychical societies, the Duke University Parapsychology Laboratory with the psychic cards that Lisa and I talked about on an episode during our cult series. all of that stuff, these scientific ways of trying to prove the supernatural, cameras, video recorders, thermometers, and then of course PKE meters and proton packs, which Aykroyd created. All of these things are kind of these ways of like proving that ghosts exist or eliminating them, which I think is fascinating about the movies, that we feel like we don't just have to prove ghosts exist, but we need an exterminator to get rid of them because they're just so bothersome. Of course, that's how Americans work, right?
Well, like, okay, so number one, I love that. I love that it came from this genuine interest in whether or not the supernatural exists, and everything that we talked about, specifically when we talked about like spiritualism and the occult and kind of the beginnings of American ghost hunting, at least. I love that it comes from that place because it is such a funny movie in parts. I mean, it's endlessly quotable. We mentioned at the beginning that line when somebody asks if you're a god, you say yes. But there are so many other good lines in this movie that we could probably spend the whole podcast just going over our favorites. But I want to talk for a little bit about the actual ghosts in the movie, because as I was, and I remember watching this as a child. Like, I don't know how young I was, but I feel like I must have been like 7, 8 years old. I didn't see the original in the theater, but I think I might have seen the second one in the theater. And the ghosts are scary. Like, I mean, they're frightening. The whole library scene, and it opens with, of course, it's so iconic, and it hits all my happy buttons because, you know, it's this big, gorgeous library and stacks of books, and then there's this ghost there. But one thing I noticed that kind of bothered me, besides the fact that they feel the need to exterminate these ghosts like they're cockroaches, and cockroaches are brought up several times in the movie, like that comparison of like ghosts to cockroaches. So they're this type of vermin, but that they can't seem to agree on what a ghost is. Like, sometimes it appears to be the specter of somebody who has once lived and then has now passed, and now they have like some sort of business here on Earth. Sometimes it's a demon, sometimes it's an ancient god. But there's this whole, like, their idea of a ghost is also very nebulous. Like, it's very loosely defined. And I guess that shouldn't bother me as much as it did, but on rewatching it, I was like, now wait a minute. What are the rules here with this?
If I can chime in, I'll have to say I kind of agree with you on that, just because I was rewatching it yesterday to prepare for this, and yeah, there's not a lot of similarity in all the ghosts. I mean, you've got the full specter woman in the library, and then you've got Slimer, which is like this weird green potato, and then you've got towards the end, once all hell is really breaking loose, the cab driver that's more like a corpse than a ghost, and yeah, there's no.
No, the cab driver is like a full-on zombie.
Yeah, like it's, yeah. That's what I mean. Like it's a walking corpse, not an actual ghost, and so yeah, like it's the consistency is a little bit off.
Okay, but let's talk Slimer. Just a minute, because you brought him up, and Slimer is one of the things that I feel like is so iconic from childhood. And I will preface everything I'm about to say with I still love this movie, and I still will always love this movie, both of them. But what an odd ghost! Like, what is he exactly? Besides a green potato that slimes things. And why did he become like the things that they were going to market to kids? Because everything had Slimer on it.
Oh yeah, he even becomes their sidekick in Real Ghostbusters, the cartoon.
That's what I was going to say. The cartoon. Yeah.
Which is great.
But yeah, why? I mean, I was watching this and I was like, wait a minute, Slimer is supposed to be like, Slimer.
And he's cute.
Not really.
I don't. Yeah, I don't really know what he's supposed to be.
I was like, I couldn't tell. I was like, did they put Slimer in there intending for him to be like the Jar Jar Binks of Ghostbusters, where they're like, oh, the kids are gonna go crazy for this guy? Or was it after the fact that they were like, wait a minute, everybody loves Slimer, so let's, put some green food coloring in Capri Sun and call it Slimer's ectoplasm drink or whatever.
Ecto Cooler. Sorry.
Cooler.
That was a little belligerent. I apologize. You got to get that name right, though. That Ecto Cooler was delicious.
Cooler, that's right. I remember. But yeah, it is such, and again, I think this could only happen in like a Dan Aykroyd movie, that becomes the, hey, kids like this thing. It's just so bizarre.
I think it's also kind of making fun of, like, they're making fun of like every kind of manifestation of the supernatural that you can have. Like, you could have demons, sure, let's do demons. Dana gets possessed, which we talked about before. They talk about they use all the technical terms, like a full-bodied apparition, a vapor form, like ectoplasm. I mean, I don't even remember what they call Slimer, but he's a category of something too. And so like they're always going to their Tobin's Spirit Guide, which is like the guides that characters would use in like Lovecraft and Algernon Blackwood stories. Like, you open this tome and you figure out like who the bad guys are that could be haunting you, or what kind of demon it is, or ghost. And so I understand what you're going with, Lisa. Slimer doesn't really make a lot of sense to me either, but I'm thinking it's like part of them making fun of all of it. Like, there are these scientists and they're seeing these crazy looking weird ghosts, and they're just like looking in their catalog, and this is a class 4 blah blah blah,
Which
some of my favorite parts of the movie is actually like Ray and Egon's back and forth like technobabble talk, where
yes,
like it just, because they do it so deadpan, and like it's great. Like, I wonder how many takes it had to do before they could get those with a straight face, because it's great stuff.
Oh, nobody delivers a line like Harold Ramis. Like, nobody. He's perfect. Well, okay, that's another thing, is the scientific approaches. I loved, and again, this was the thing that had kind of gone over my head as a kid when I watched it. But right after the library scene, we see Peter Venkman with the guy and the girl and running the psychic tests. And of course, but he has also this complete blatant disregard for actually finding out if anybody has psychic ability, because he's too busy trying to hit on the pretty girl. And of course, then they immediately get kicked out of their academic institution, which I thought, of course they did, because if that's how you conducted a scientific experiment. I know they're kind of poking fun at all the I guess psychic research that had been done and documented leading up to that, but I did find that humorous this time around, was the scientific testing that they went through, the psychobabble, the kind of tossing the terms around. One thing though, and again, this is another thing, I realized you could read the movie two ways, sort of. They're either really good researchers, or they're incredibly talented con men, because there wasn't a problem with ghosts in New York City until the Ghostbusters were established, right?
Well, you sound just like the guy from the EPA.
Yeah, you're like the bad guy.
I mean, well, that's the other thing, is
people just didn't believe in them.
I think it was also more of their timing just happened to be that they got established around the time that Gozer was coming through the whatever.
What I'm saying is that is very, very convenient. And if anybody had the ability to look through some dusty old books and raise a hell demon, I would think they might have access to those books. I'm just putting that out there. That's all I'm saying. It's suddenly they were on Time magazine's cover, They went from being kicked out of the academic institution, the academic world, to being on the cover of Time magazine very quickly.
Well, that was a montage. We don't know how much time was passing.
Right, it could have taken a while.
And I'll say this, I mean, perhaps, yes, the founding of Ghostbusters was coincidental in terms of the uptick in, like, supernatural activity, but it seems like maybe they were responding to the need because, yes, Ray takes out a third mortgage on his parents' house, which I love that. Everybody has 3 mortgages these days, Ray. But if there hadn't been a need, they would have just gone out of business. And so, they were responding to a need that other people just didn't think existed. They were willing to write off those bumps in the night as something else that, the Ghostbusters were actually able to capitalize on. And maybe also, in some cases they were con men, because Peter Venkman is pretty much a con man in a lot of ways. But
well, I guess.
I'm sorry, Lisa. I was going to say they're also tapping into the kind of, I think we talked about this before, but when something happens that's supernatural to somebody, it's like you don't really believe it yourself. You don't want to tell anybody. They'll think you're crazy. And I feel like they tap into that because that amazingly awkward commercial they do where they end with, "We're ready to believe you," and this idea that people have had problems with ghosts forever, but they were afraid because they didn't know who to go to. And they're like, like you said, Matt, they're like tapping into this market basically to provide this service.
Can we also just spend a moment like reliving that commercial, because that commercial was amazingly hilarious. Like it was everything you would see on like 80s cable access kind of commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, in the commercial plays at a key point in the movie, right? Because when we see it, we actually see it on Dana's television, because that is what prompts her, of course, to call them. And I would just like to point out how absolutely strong and incredible Dana is. Like, after watching these 2 movies, I aspire to be her now, because she has seen a portal to what we can only assume is hell in her refrigerator. And she is calm enough to stay in her apartment like nothing happened. And then call. She stays in that apartment for a very long time, is what I'm saying. Nothing has happened.
Some would argue a bit too long, in fact. But yes, no, I agree. Dana's just a great character, and really does show, like, we talked about Sigourney Weaver's portrayal of Ripley in the Aliens movies just not too long ago, it feels like. And I'm wondering if some of that was a choice for her in this role as well, to say, like, no, Dana is she's a strong woman in and of herself, and especially in the sense that I would have gotten the hell out of that apartment the first time that there was a portal to whatever in my fridge. Like, no, I don't mess around with that.
I'm just thinking I would have, immediately left the building. I don't even know if I would have grabbed anything on my way out, and I would have just been like, well, I'm homeless now. I'm going to have to get a new identity because I left my wallet in that apartment, and I'm not touching it now. And she's very calm and collected about that. Even when she's taking Peter through her apartment when he finally comes to like check things out, and which, by the way, this is the other thing that kind of makes me think, at least in the beginning of their business, they're not really expecting to see much, because he's just walking around like nothing. Somebody has said, hey, there's a haunting going on, and he's not doing things. She says she says something like, you don't seem like a scientist. And then she says, you're more like a game show host. And I thought, well, yeah, he's not doing anything. He's making quips about her bedroom and saying it's she says, oh, nothing happened in the bedroom. And, of course, he says, what a crime or that's a crime or something along those lines. And but she's still as I was watching it, I'm like, woman, you are being so calm right now. Like, eggs flew out of the carton and fried on your counter. And you're just like, yes, here are the eggs.
Yeah, she is pretty matter of fact at that point.
That's just what I'm saying. I don't know many people who would react to this blatantly supernatural event that had happened in her home that way.
I was just thinking about in the second movie, she's the one who initially goes after Oscar at the museum by herself, which is pretty impressive. Well, first she climbs out on the ledge after him. I don't know if we want to get into the second movie right now, but she climbs out on the ledge after him and knows exactly where to go to the museum. When I was watching the movie, I was like, wow, she doesn't even wait for the Ghostbusters to get back or take anybody with her. She just goes. So yeah, she kind of carries that courage with her. Of course, there it's protecting her child. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's the point of the second movie.
Well, we could talk about the second movie.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to go ahead and kind of jump into it.
Yeah, so now we won't go too much into this because Mel and I have shared our amazement for Dana in other episodes. I think it might have been the Possession series where we talked a little bit about it. Mm-hmm. But basically, we'll sum it up for those of you who haven't gotten to listen to all of our back catalog yet. Basically, Dana is this character who has everything together in her life. In the first movie, she's a successful musician. She's, living on her own in New York City. She has friends. She's dating some. She's just having a good time. And everyone around her, all the men, are trying to date her, but not only trying to date her, they will not take no for an answer. So she has her neighbor, who, what was his name? Lewis?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Lewis.
Yeah, Lewis. That's right. Played by Rick Moranis. And he is, she's having to sneak past his apartment because she's afraid of seeing him, of running into him, because he's just pestering her so much. And she is pretty clear when she first meets Peter Venkman, and pretty much throughout the whole movie. I mean, I guess she finds him charming, but she's also like, this is not happening. Whatever you think is happening is not happening. And the movie ends up becoming Venkman and Lewis kind of fighting over her possessed body, basically. And it always makes me cringe a little bit when possessed Dana has to kiss possessed Lewis, because you just think, she spent the whole movie expressing that she did not want to do that. And the places that the haunting happens are places of more traditional domesticity, like the kitchen or the bedroom. And so her being kind of this modern woman who's in control of her life and who doesn't need a man around all the time. It seems as if the supernatural forces are kind of butting up against that, which is really frustrating in the second movie when you see her pushing a baby carriage, because it kind of feels like she's been shoved back into that traditional domestic role that she didn't inhabit in the first movie, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But the whole tone of the second movie feels different to me. And to me, I don't know if you guys see this. I thought it felt like more of a traditional horror movie than the first one did, because the first one is it's got so much like satire, and it's got so much comedy, and it's got so much of other things that it doesn't feel like a horror movie. But the second one feels more like a straightforward horror movie to me.
Well, I want to back up for 1 second and just say with Dana in the second movie that yes, she is in a domestic role, but you'll notice that she's a single mother, and we never find out who her father is. And so I do like that fact that it's still, there is that, it's not purely she's become a housewife and stay-at-home mom. She's still a working mom who's single, and we know nothing about the dad except that he was somebody, and I love the fact that she and Venkman are not together in this movie as you would expect them to be because it's a sequel. So,
yeah, no, she remains the like kick-ass Dana that we like from the. I mean, she really does because, and you're right, in pointing that out that she is a single mother. We don't know who the father is, and even though Venkman is still after her. She's still resisting at least a little bit. Yeah, that's thank you for pointing that out. That's good.
But yeah, as you were saying though, with the tone of the movie, I didn't want to derail from that because I thought that was a good point. Yeah, it does feel like procedurally a little bit more like a straight up horror movie instead of the horror satire thriller, whatever the first one is. I don't know how you. I mean, obviously it's a comedy, but yeah, it does feel more. The second one does feel more like a horror movie.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first movie just feels a lot like a group of friends who are down on their luck and decide to kind of follow their passion and find success doing it. It just happens to be ghost research. And then the second one, I mean, I like a lot about. I had forgotten about the pink goo that responds to emotion, and that great toaster scene. I don't know why that makes me so happy, but it does.
That's my favorite scene in the movie is the toaster. And Jackie Wilson singing. I love it.
I mean, it's just perfect. And then of course you have the ghosts of the electric chair, the Scaliva brothers. I think that was the name.
Something like that.
Something like that. Anyway, that's kind of fun, but the stakes are raised, and I don't know if because there's a child involved, but the stakes do feel raised. Of course, you all already mentioned the baby on the ledge, and then Ghost Mary Poppins coming. But
and the wonderful Rosemary's Baby kind of shout out with the carriage that she's pushing at the beginning of the movie. Yeah.
But even then, when you get to the big bad of the movie of like the Prince Vigo and the haunted painting, that squirrely little guy she works with even he's sitting there in front of this like demonic presence, I guess, that he's worked very hard to summon. And he says, "Oh, hey, by the way, can I have this woman?" So even then we have men who are like bidding against supernatural forces to possess her.
Yeah, and he even tries to blackmail her into being in a romantic relationship with him because he's like, "Oh, you could be the mother of the ruler of the world. Your baby will be safe as long as you do this," kind of thing. Of course, she plays along because she wants to save her baby from Vigo the Carpathian invading his body. But yeah, it's a really skin crawly scene.
It is.
I agree. So much so that and like you, I would say I think I saw it in the theater when I was younger, but that actor, for the longest time, I kind of associated him with that kind of slimy sort of thing, and so like he's been in a lot of other things, and I've seen him, and I have to kind of remind myself that no, he's an actor. He is not that person. I know I was like 9 when I saw this movie, but I'm not 9 now. I'm smart enough to know, that he was acting, playing a role. Because he really did get that, like, well, when you're done with the baby, can I have her? Yeah, like it's just very sleazy.
It is. It's sleazy and slimy and gross. Which, by the way, did it explain why she is now an art restorer?
It didn't, but she spends a lot of the movie. She's getting ready to go back to the orchestra, so I don't know if it's because the hours are better doing that, but it is. I was thinking about that when Matt was talking about how she's still a strong character, because it's like she has this job which seems to make it easier for her to take care of Oscar, but she's practicing the cello, and she says at one point that she can't wait to quit that job so she can get back into the orchestra. So she's taking care of the baby and following her career, or trying to.
Yeah, that might be the rationale behind it, that I'm sure being an art restorer is a bit more of a 9-to-5 sort of job, whereas being in an orchestra would be
a lot of travel.
Yeah, travel and unpredictable and lots of nights and that kind of thing, where I mean, so it would make sense that it makes sense that she's not being in the orchestra in order to not have to, like, you know, spend an inordinate amount of money on babysitters and that kind of thing, but also so she can be around him. But no, they don't really explain why art restoration at all, which that's always kind of bugged me too. That it's like, okay, I didn't realize you could go from being in an orchestra to art restoration, but apparently those skills overlap.
She is multi-talented, which is another reason that Ghostbusters is really about how great Sigourney Weaver is.
And how everybody wants to be with her and possess her.
Literally.
Literally, figuratively.
So Matt, I kind of I got very excited talking about Sigourney Weaver, but we kind of ran right through that toaster scene, and I think it needs a little bit of discussion because yeah, I had said before the tone of this movie feels different, you know, that it does feel like more of a straightforward horror movie, but this scene feels like, you know, the Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, Ghostbusters, what you've come to expect.
Well, and I'll share this little anecdote too. Like, I always loved that scene, and I've always loved, probably because of that scene, that song by Jackie Wilson, "Your Love Keeps Lifting Me Higher." But more recently, well, I say more recently, but it's not that recent, but definitely not my childhood anymore. But when my daughter was little, we watched Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2, and she loved that scene too, and I had it on DVD, and she would make me skip over the first part of the movie and start the movie at that scene and then watch it till the end because she liked the toaster scene so much. But yeah, for those of you who haven't seen it, which, like, I would question why you're listening to this particular episode if you haven't seen the Ghostbusters movies, but hey, if you haven't, that's great, keep listening. But if you haven't seen it, they take the slime that responds to emotions and put it in the toaster and start playing happy music, and it makes the toaster pop around like it's dancing, and it's just so it's so unexpected and hilarious and happy at the same time. But like, you could, it's a very much, like you said, a Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd kind of flourish right there.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they have a toaster dancing, and then I love immediately that the thought is, can we market this? Like, we've got the best toaster ever. We could, like, sell this, and, you know, I think it's I don't remember who it is. Maybe it's Harold Ramis who points out, like, yeah, until the people in the house start fighting. You know, because the thing responds to emotions. So if you're singing a happy, upbeat song, or you're happy, it's going to be happy. But the whole idea is that there's this kind of collective anger in New York City that's, you know, aggravating all the pink goo.
Yeah, it was never clear if the pink goo was there and they made it angry, or if their anger made the pink goo.
Right. Yeah. It you know, we don't really know, but I guess they don't know. They just know this is how it works. And
also, there was never really a connection between the pink goo and Vigo the Carpathian either, was there? Like, no. He wasn't causing it. It just, the two things happened to be discovered at the same time.
They see the river of slime in the painting, but there's no clear connection.
My thought was always, and I don't know if this is it, my thought was always that Mr. Slimy Man raised up Vigo, and Vigo brought the pink slime with him. Like, the bringing up of this big bad caused the pink slime.
And see, that's how I'd always, like, assumed.
But I don't know.
Yeah, that's how I'd assumed it was, but they never make a clear and established link to it. So, I mean, the two could be just coexisting in the film. But, yeah, I think it was probably a consequence of him trying to summon Vigo through the painting.
Yeah, kind of a supernatural byproduct that happened. Yeah. I always get
I was gonna say I kind of feel sorry for Janos a little bit at the beginning too, because he's just cleaning Vigo, and Vigo kind of gets in his head and pushes him down. In some ways, he's a victim of it, just like Lewis was in Ghostbusters 1. I'm not, you know, excusing his behavior, but he kind of possesses and messes up Janos, a painting cleaner dude, that pushes him to pursue Dana in the way that he does. He had those desires, but he's possessed first.
Can we also say, if the dancing toaster scene is my favorite scene in the movie, my favorite line from Ghostbusters 2 is when Lewis is trying to defend them in court. And he says,
I know what you're going to say.
And when I turned into a dog, they saved me. Sorry,
Yes.
I know, you mentioned Lewis, but I had to throw that out there. But like, that's my favorite line in the movie, hands down. But I think there's meant to be a sort of parallel between Lewis in the first movie and whatever his name is, Janos or whatever, because they both do get possessed in some way and are trying to acquire Dana, even though she's also possessed in the first one. But yeah, I wonder if that's deliberate, if there's a, you know, some sort of thematic overlap with those two characters.
I think there is. And also, you know, you mentioned the possession of Dana, and, you know, it occurs to me that in the first one, she had to be possessed in order for them to control her because, you know, she had too strong of a will before. And so she had to be possessed to be controlled. This time around, she doesn't need that because baby Oscar gives them that control. So just by kind of taking the baby and saying, hey, as long as you go along with what we're saying, baby's going to be just fine. They have their method of control without needing to fully bodily possess her. So there's a parallel there between her as well.
Yeah,
I don't know what it means.
I was gonna say the baby kind of becomes a bargaining chip.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what that means. It's just that there's an interesting, I think, connection between the two films.
And this is jumping ahead, but I still get so angry at the end when the painting changes to the Ghostbusters with Oscar and Dana's not even in the painting. Dana is the mother, and she went there to rescue Oscar first.
I mean, she was out on a ledge for that kid.
She should at least get to hold him in the painting.
Yeah. Yeah, that is frustrating. It's a complete erasure, actually, which is.
Yeah, there's an interesting article out there that I read a while back about it, where it's almost like it talked about how the mother's erased by the end, and it reminded me of what you talked about, Lisa, with the end of Dracula, where Mina's got to name her kid this god-awful long name to, like, to show all the fathers, you know, that the kid had metaphorically or whatever. And it kind of reminds me of the same thing. The Ghostbusters get to all be Oscar's father, and Dana's kind of pushed out of the picture.
Yeah, that does not sit well with me. No, I don't like that. But I still do love these movies. I mean, Matt, you mentioned that courtroom scene, and I'm pretty sure this is the scene that had my favorite line, which was actually when they were talking about they were trying to protect themselves legally, and it was kind of like, you know, and if we do this, then it's going to expose ourselves, and you don't want us exposing ourselves. And I don't know why, but I always laugh so hard at that. One thing, too, that strikes me as different, because we talked about this a little bit in our possession episode, and this is kind of going back to the first Ghostbusters, because I didn't see it as much in the second. You know, when you're talking about especially like life after death, or especially when you start talking about demons, like coming up from hell or any kind of apocalypse, usually there is some sort of Christian message with it. And I was surprised watching it this time about how much religion was in the first movie. They quoted from Revelations at one point. For some reason in City Hall, there's like a Catholic cardinal or bishop or somebody who shows up randomly.
He's the one that convinces the mayor to let the Ghostbusters do their thing, too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because at one point I was taking note of who all was in there, and it was impressive because it was, so the mayor in City Hall, the priest presence, whoever he was, the police, there were actually uniformed police officers, the EPA was represented, and then the Ghostbusters. And I just thought, that is a really impressive gathering of people to be talking about this. And yeah, you're right that it was because the EPA definitely, they were the bad guy in this film. They did not want the Ghostbusters to continue their work. And it was, I'll just call him the priest because I can't really remember what his title was. But it was the priest who convinces the mayor to do that. Which was kind of surprising. Again, I don't know if there was a message in that. I was just surprised at how much lip service was being paid to a kind of the Judeo-Christian tradition of ghosts and demons and possession in that movie. Because I had always just remembered it as being, oh, ghosts. They go out and they kill ghosts. And not really going into that. So that was surprising to me.
Oh yeah, and even, of course, it turns out that Dana's building was built by like a cult demon worshiper named Ivo Shandor or whatever his name is. I think that's his name. Who wants to bring this alternate reality. It's like you're reading like Lovecraft or something.
Oh, yeah.
And so the metal in the building conducts supernatural energy, but even that is kind of a religious aspect. I wonder if it's playing off of that. And I think we've talked about this before, but the whole I think, what was it, ever since like Enlightenment, we have this conflict between religion and science, and sometimes the conflict is stronger than others. But in a lot of paranormal fiction and a lot of like occult fiction that Aykroyd might have been playing with or whatever, you kind of always have this, like walking of a line between the two, and I wonder if that's what they were trying to show, that these are all like the big, like if you think about all the major representatives of the things that control you in your life are important to you, I guess. It's like you have the religious figure, you have the emergency personnel, the services, you have the government, you have, these are all the folks who are in charge, and they don't know what the heck is going on. And it's like you need someone like the Ghostbusters to step in, and that's why the Ghostbusters make a perfect scapegoat for everything too. It's like, instead of admitting that they can't understand it or protect the people, they send the Ghostbusters in, and then when the Ghostbusters mess up, they just blame them and get rid of them. I mean, the more I'm talking now, the more I think the first movie is just all about repression. Containing, eliminating, repressing until it explodes.
Sometimes it does, though. It feels like that that they just, when they were writing the script, just like put in everything in a big blender and hit it on high speed, because sometimes you're just like, I mean, how many more things like can you get going on in one movie? But then you start noticing just the small things that are seeded through there, and you're like, okay, I'm either watching a hot mess right now or I'm watching just a complete work of genius. Because in that scene where you have all the leaders who are, and by the way, you talk about getting mad about it. Yes, the priest did kind of step up and convince the mayor to let the Ghostbusters do their thing, but it was also when the Ghostbusters reminded him that he would be saving registered voters from death.
Yes, that's always how they get him.
So it was just kind of like this idea of, oh, politicians only care about, that next voting poll. So there's that kind of cynicism too. But I also noticed that on the mayor's desk, I don't know if y'all saw the little placard sign. and it said, "Be not afraid." And as soon as I saw that, it was like I heard this song in my head, the Ray Parker Jr. song, "I ain't afraid of no ghosts." And I just thought, well, that had to be intentional, and I love it. So there's also those kind of fun little things that watching it the first time or maybe even the second time you wouldn't notice. And you have to go back and just look really carefully at how they crafted the scene, because you blink and you miss it. And that's one of the things that I think, despite all the things that annoy me about these movies, those are the things that I love about it.
One of the things I was thinking of, Lisa, while you were talking, is that even in the second movie, you have like the powers that they bump up against the powers that be, with the guys that are checking on him as to why they're breaking up the road when they're trying to find the slime, and they end up, I think they have to deal, they end up getting committed in that movie as well. But in the first movie, it really focuses on the EPA. I was just wondering, what did you guys think? I mean, I know there are kind of like nuclear containment issues in Ghostbusters 1, the proton packs and the containment unit that they use, that sort of thing. But what did you guys think of the fact that it's the EPA that's kind of the big bad, as Matt called them earlier, that kind of bureaucrat?
All right. Number one, at first I thought it was really bizarre that it was the EPA, because they seem like the least likely of all the government departments to really come down on that. But then you start thinking about it, and I'm like, you know what? EPA dude had, a good point, because number one, the Ghostbusters did not know what they were doing, because we haven't even talked about Slimer, but we did not talk about Slimer's first appearance, which was in the hotel, right?
Mm-hmm.
They destroyed that hotel.
They destroy the courtroom in the second movie.
They absolutely destroy this hotel, okay? And I understand that, the guy, it's played for laughs, because the whole thing is like, try to be discreet about this, and they even call, they're like, oh, they're exterminators, oh, must be a really big cockroach or something like that. So there's it's played for laughs, and it's really funny, but they're destroying this hotel. Right? So that's going to get the attention of some people. I don't know who would come, maybe the Better Business Bureau or somebody would come and investigate this. But, in that, when they, of course, there's the iconic line of "don't cross the streams." And, of course, Egon brings this up as they're busting the ghosts. Like, it wasn't like, hey, let me tell you how to work these things beforehand. It was like in the middle of it, he says, by the way, you can't cross the streams. And it's like, why? And he basically says it's going to bring about a molecular apocalypse. Like, when you boil it down to what he's talking about, he's like, yeah, everything will cease to exist at the molecular level if we cross these streams, maybe. And I'm thinking, you know what? They're lucky only the EPA came and checked this out, because I'm surprised, like, armed army men, did not come in, SWAT teams come in and be like, you cannot have a weapon of mass destruction in your little bachelor pad of a firehouse. Like, you can't just have it laying around. So, it is a little weird that it was the EPA, because, again, I seem to think about them as being very docile people. But at the same time, when you think about it, totally justified.
Well, and I think about it, too, that, maybe they weren't doing anything technically illegal that they could send the police in for, but the EPA could come in under, the whatever laws that he cited to turn off the containment unit. And I always thought of it as kind of like, well, how did they bring down Al Capone? Tax evasion. They used an accountant, essentially. And, so in this case, they're not technically breaking any laws by, busting ghosts and destroying property and soliciting a fee. So maybe it's the EPA that'll have to bring them down. Plus, it's a great joke too, that it's that's the government agency.
Yeah, right. No, but I think there you have it, right? I mean, Ghostbusters, the supernatural Al Capone. I mean, there is nothing left to say.
Well, then, on that note, should we end this episode, you think?
I think so. I think so.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, and we will be back in 2 more weeks with some more of this summer of sci-fi. We will see you then.